Linda.
Hi, Brooke, and hi, everybody. Welcome.
Yes, welcome to Eat, Pray, Love, the secret success formula of Elizabeth Gilbert's best-selling memoir. That's the topic that we're covering tonight of this very beloved book, and we're super excited to delve in and share some of these secrets. And let's see, I'm going to tell you a little bit for those of you who don't know who we are. Linda, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody?
Okay, I'm Linda Joy Myers, and I'm the president and founder of the National Association of Memoir Writers. I'm the author of several books. My memoirs, Don't Call Me Mother, and I'm the author of a couple of how-to books, The Power of Memoir and The Journey of Memoir. And I just love teaching memoir to people and coaching memoir, and love these courses that Brooke and I are doing. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you all so much. And I'm Brooke Warner, the publisher of She Writes Press and founder of Warner Coaching, which is my coaching practice where I coach writers to publication. And my book is What's Your Book? A step-by-step guide to get you from inspiration to published author. And concur with Linda Joy here, this thing that we're doing, Write Your Memoir in 6 months, which is our longer, intensive course coupled with these super fun, shorter offerings that we're doing, which have now extended into teaching best-selling memoir, in part because we just had so much fun and such great feedback from our wild course that we taught earlier this year. And so we're doing Eat, Pray, Love because it's the consummate best-selling memoir of all times. I actually read recently in Elizabeth Gilbert was in Poets and Writers this month, which was just coincidental, actually, if any of you saw the piece. And it said that it sold, oh, shoot. Sorry. Thank you, Linda. It says this, there we go. The screen was not showing until now, and I apologize, everybody. Here, the screen is on. But it said that Elizabeth Gilbert's book sold 8 million copies.
Wow. I call that success, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. So there we go, everybody. I hope that everyone can see my screen, and sorry for the little blackout that was there, but here are our little pictures and bios. And so I'd love to get a check of who's out there. We had a lot of interest in the call tonight, almost 800 signups, and so I always like to check and just get a little handle on who's calling and from where. And so if you could just put into your chat box where you're calling from so that we can get either chat or question box. It doesn't matter if you're online. Let us know where you're at. Okay, here they come in. I love this. New York, Massachusetts, Montana, Toronto, Nebraska,
Oregon,
Key West.
Great.
Fantastic. All right, all over the place. I love that. We'll see if we can see any international people. Here's someone from Ontario, Canada. So really fun to see who all is calling in, and thank you for that. Athens, Greece. Welcome.
All right.
That's
you might
fantastic.
get the prize for the farthest away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really fun. All right, thanks, everybody. Okay, so we are going to launch into about 40 minutes of teaching here, and then we're going to tell you about the 4-week course that is the longer course of Eat, Pray, Love, and then we are going to take questions and answers. So if feel free to put them in the box just to hold the spot if you want to, or save them for the end. It doesn't really matter. We're open to receiving them, but we're just going to move through our teaching here. Okay, so we're going to start out with what a formulaic memoir is and why publishers love it. And so Eat, Pray, Love is this perfect formula. I don't know how many people know the backstory of Elizabeth Gilbert's, how she thought of Eat, Pray, Love, but basically she did conceptualize the idea and then get the book deal. And not everybody can do that. She was in a unique position. She was already a pretty established writer, writing for the New Yorker, and had some other books under her belt. And she came up with this concept. And basically, I believe that the advance allowed her to finance her year abroad. And certainly most authors will not be in that position. But the formula that Elizabeth presents here is a 3-part book: pleasure in Italy, devotion in India, and balance between worldly enjoyment and divine transcendence in Bali. And so these, you know, 3 sections of the book are clearly noted, you know, in parts 1, 2, and 3, and then they're divided into 36 little sections, basically structured around this idea of 108 prayer beads that you read about at the beginning of the book. And so it has this really nice balance to it that, you know, anyone looking at it, I mean, I have to say, you know, that this idea of a formulaic memoir is that it is very satisfying. And readers and publishers like that. And it's like the reason that I want to say, you know, why publishers love it, and my background is out of 13 years in traditional book publishing as an editor, an acquiring editor, and an executive editor. And we were always drawn to the formulaic memoir. And the reason behind that is that it's very easy to wrap your mind around. It's very easy to talk about. You know, in one sentence, you can say, Eat, Pray, Love is about eating in Italy, you know, praying in India, and loving in Bali. You know, and you can really wrap your mind around what that would be. What this is in publishing is high concept. And high concept memoirs, I wouldn't say that all high concept memoirs are formulaic, but any memoir that is high concept, or rather that is formulaic, is high concept, if that makes sense. So, so the way that you want to think about that is that it's not to say that your memoir necessarily should be formulaic or that you need it to be if it's not, but there is something inherent in the structure of a formulaic memoir that qualifies it as a formulaic memoir. And so a lot of times if I see a formula beginning to develop in someone's work who I'm mentoring or coaching, I do ask them, you know, do you want to think about breaking this into 3 parts? You know, do you want to look at opportunities to have something more structured? Now, it's not just about having parts, right? Because the concept in and of itself is part of the formula. So it's not just the fact that she has 3 parts. It's also this very clever concept of the prayer beads that very much relate to her story and work for her story. But it's more than that, you know, it could be different than that, I guess I should say. You know, when you're thinking about other formulaic memoirs that exist, you know, it could be, you know, another formula that I can think of that I've seen that works. And it's actually kind of similar to Elizabeth Gilbert's in a sense, because it's this idea of little tiny chapters strung together. You know, that in fact is a formula. It's something that the reader sees right off the bat, that this book doesn't have chapters. You know, in fact, although it's numbered as chapters and there are ostensibly 108 chapters, I would argue that these aren't really chapters, you know, that they're more like scenes pulled together along the prayer bead. And so I think the biggest thing to note in terms of a takeaway of formulaic memoir is that if you have something that feels high concept or that feels like it could be a formula, it's something to draw out of your memoir. I can think of a woman, you know, who I worked with a while ago who had sort of a similar high concept memoir and dividing her memoir into mind, body, and spirit, you know, and then tracing her entire life along the mind, body, spirit path, you know, for her particular direction and what her story was. And then I've also seen writers, several writers I've worked with actually, who have done the heroine's journey or the hero's journey, you know, which follows an arc. I believe it has 7 or 8 steps. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but that's also a formula, you know, so that they're following their memoir is the hero's journey is meant to mirror the hero's journey and is executed that way. And if you have, you know, something that you can point to that shows the reader that you're doing something, or the reader or the publisher, you know, that you're doing this in an intentional way and setting it up from the beginning like this, it actually serves as a, you know, a solid pitch, you know, in terms of pitching your work, and it serves as a solid structure, which, like I said, we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then in addition to that, it actually serves as marketing hooks. because if you look at Liz Gilbert's book, for instance, the marketing hooks are really in these themes, of pleasure, devotion, and balance. And she can then talk about them through the lens of Italy and India and Bali. And that gives publishers a lot to sink their teeth into. It's kind of like a ready-made publicity hook. And as much as authors, and especially of memoir, often aren't thinking about this kind of thing very early on in the game, Linda Joy and I like to teach in our longer course that you really might want to, not to the detriment of your writing, certainly, but beginning to conceptualize these sort of high-level things in a way that will ensure that you have a more saleable book down the road.
I just want to add something. Somebody wanted to know the definition of high concept, and that means like highly desirable or easily understood, or, say a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. High concept means high, the definition is that it's easy to talk about. When something is high concept, it means that the concept shines through in a really easy way. And so that way, like I'm saying, Eat, Pray, Love, if you look at it, one woman's search for everything across Italy, India, and Indonesia, that concept is shining through. You know what the memoir is about just by looking at the title and the subtitle. And so inherently, that's a high concept book. And high concept books are things like Julie and Julia, that she cooks for 1 year through Julia Child's cookbook. It's very high concept. It just means you look at it and you get it. Whereas a long, meandering, this is the story of my life, and then I went over here, and then, I had this traumatic experience, and then this happened, it's fine, but it's not high concept. Those kinds of books are much, literary memoirs are typically not high concept. And so it really is around this, how quickly can you grasp the thought.
Okay, great, good. That's good to know, isn't it? For people to think about. And then if your book isn't that, not be able to focus it down that way, but it's worth knowing about so that you can ask yourself these questions and see how it evolves. And the memoir will also, we say this in our longer course, the memoir will also help tell you what it needs and the kind of shape that it is heading toward. But the more we know about how we can shape it, that helps. It's sort of like a conversation between you and your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, we use that language. The memoir knows what it wants to be, and some of you will have formulaic memoirs, or you can you kind of, I would say, shape or mold it into a formulaic memoir, and others of you will not be able to, no matter how hard you try. But that said, it's important to know the different kinds of memoirs that exist out on the marketplace. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, right. Okay, I love all that. So, oh, that's a nice picture. Yes, now one of the things we need to do as memoirists is to tell our own story and be very specific about what our story is. And also, your pointer is wandering. Okay, there you go.
Sorry.
And also be specific about our own story, and also create a connection that is universal with the reader. And what we look at in the memoirs that we read and talk about is how does this author reach out to the reader? And so we looked at that, of course, in Eat, Pray, Love, and we talked about it quite a bit. And one of the things that really stood out, and I'd read the book years ago, and then we both had, and then we reread it to focus on the class and see how we felt about it now after some time had gone by. And the thing that really struck me a lot was the voice. I feel like Elizabeth Gilbert is a friend of mine who I just sat down and had tea with or something. She has conversations with the reader. She's very natural. She's very kind of open and very vulnerable, and you know kind of where all of her vulnerabilities are hanging out. And I presume I take them to be real. I mean, we could say, well, maybe she's just manipulating us, but she is consistent throughout many hundreds of pages. And I think if you're not being real, that you can't do that. I mean, that there's an element of good writing. She's a journalist. She knew how to write. She wasn't just writing her first piece when she did this, and I suppose that shows through. But she has intimate conversations with the reader all the way through the book. And I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples. And one of them is on page 52. So she says, "Here I am in Rome, and I am in trouble. The goons of depression and loneliness have barged into my life again, and I just took my last Wellbutrin 3 days ago. There are more pills in my bottom drawer, but I don't want them. I want to be free of them forever." So here this woman is, like, barely into the beginning of the book, talking about depression and loneliness, capitalized, and about her antidepressant medicine. It takes some guts to do that, and we can all say, oh yeah, depression and loneliness. Oh, you mean you too, you famous lady? You too get this? And so we, regular people, go, oh wow, huh? We want to know more. We want to understand, well, what's she going to do about that? It becomes what I call a story question. She opens up something, a theme, and then she follows it through. We're going to talk much more about themes later. She opens it up, and we then start to question, oh, what role does this have in her life? And we start to think, oh, she's talking about her depression and loneliness, and well, I felt that, but what is she going to do with this? Where is it leading me, the reader? So I think it's a really, really excellent technique. And another place where her voice is really great, she's in Italy, and she's been traumatized earlier by a divorce, a very, very, very tough divorce. And to her credit, she doesn't go into the he said, she said stuff about the divorce, but we do get that it was very painful and very hard, and she says enough about it that we understand that. And then she had a lover that she had a very rough ending with that relationship, so she's feeling a little fractured when she does this trip. So in Italy, though, where she's eating and weaving herself into the Italian, the life of being in Italy, she says this on page 113. She said, "But is it such a bad thing to live like this for a little while, for a few months of one's life? Is it so awful to travel through time with no greater ambition than to find the next lovely meal, or to learn how to speak a language for no higher purpose than it pleases your ear to hear it, or to nap in a garden in a patch of sunlight in the middle of the day next to your favorite fountain?" Beautiful writing, very poetic, and notice that she's being very specific. And so one of the things that makes her story universal, and many of you who've been in writing classes have probably heard this before, but in order to make things universal, you use the specifics, and the reader enters into your world through those specifics. And through doing that, they circle back into their own reflections on what you're writing about. The other thing that Elizabeth does is she has a sense of humor in the face of pain, and there's many, many confessions throughout the book, little confessions and bigger confessions, and all these things join together to make her very, what we call, relatable. And this is what makes her story universal. We relate to her as a person. We relate to her beautiful writing. And she does what we call, and you'll probably hear more about this if you're in our other classes, it's what we call creating a world through her language and through her writing. She creates a world and invites us into it, and we go with her. And in going with her, we are on the journey to finding, we want to eat. I mean, it made me want to eat lots of Italian food when I was reading that section, and yet and appreciate that a very beautiful meal can also be a spiritual experience, And then she takes us to India, and and she also educates throughout the book using various points and teaches us a lot of things. So this all makes this story really relatable, as if she's any woman and we're every woman and man, and it's really created a lot of success for this. Go ahead, Brooke, next.
Yeah, perfect. It's so important, that relatability and asking those questions up front. So now I'm going to move into talking about structure. I planted a couple of little seeds for that in the first section in talking about the importance of structure. And certainly, you know, like I said, you may not have a formulaic memoir on your hands, but you do need to ask yourself some very specific questions about your own structure. I think the sooner the better. You know, one of the things that people who work with me know is that I do love structure, a little bit unabashed about that, and that's fine. And I certainly work with people who hate structure and who resist structure, and I, you know, we can have a conversation about the values of it and the ways in which it, you know, because a lot of right-brained people tend to think that it's just not part of their creative process. But I argue over and over again that it's important to have both. And so one of the things that you want to be thinking about when you're considering your own structure is things like the number of chapters that you're going to have. So Elizabeth Gilbert has these micro chapters, these little prayer bead chapters that are 108 little sections that almost don't feel like chapters, but in fact, for the purposes of her book, they are. And then you want to ask yourself about word count. Every memoir is trying to reach approximately 80,000 words. It could be less than that. I say the range is 60 to 100,000 words, and anything less than that is too short, and anything more of that than that is too long. And so if you're looking at approximately 80,000 words, and I think that Liz Gilbert's memoir is probably that. You can kind of tell just by the length of the book. And so approximately, you know, if she's looking at 108 chapters, it means that her chapters were around 740 words. Now, I'm sure some of them were 500 and others were, you know, over 1,000, but she does have these little tiny chapters. Most of you are going to have chapters that, I'm getting a bit of an echo, Linda Joy, sorry, I don't know if you can
I don't hear it.
on your, okay.
No.
Oh, good. Perfect.
Yeah.
If you can't hear it, maybe other people can't hear it. That's great.
Hope
okay, so what I want to say is that most of you are going to have a more normal range, you know, something in the range of 20 to 30 chapters, which is more typical. And so if you do the math with 80,000 words and 25 chapters, then you're looking at something like 3,200 words per chapter. And so you want to just take a look at that. I believe, you know, and we teach from the outset so that you anticipate where you're going, and you don't have to adhere to it 100%, but these are just valuable questions to ask and to have. If you have a bit of a container, again, I'm going to be talking about the container a little bit later, it helps you with the arc of the narrative and to know where you're going. And so one of the things that I would also encourage you to look at is to know where you're starting and to know where you're finishing. You know, don't just walk into this blindly. Like, I know I'm starting here, but I have no idea in hell where I'm ending, because that is a recipe for getting stuck in the muddy middle, which is part of what we teach and is Linda Joy's term of the stuckness of the middle of your memoir, which can start right after chapter 1. And then finally, you know, asking yourself, what is this slice of life that I'm covering? And we taught Wild because it was a framed memoir, and it lasted, you know, from when Cheryl Strayed starts out on the Pacific Crest Trail, and then she ends, you know, several months later. And even though the story takes place in this very limited period of time, just a few months, it's her whole existence up to that point that gets covered. But again, there's a way in which, how are you going to tell this story, right? Elizabeth Gilbert's book takes place over the course of a year, but certainly we learn about what happened leading up to this trip through memory and through flashback. And so, you know, what is the slice of life that you're going to cover in your memoir? And that, again, you know, will lead you to questions about your structure. All
Yeah,
right,
that's
we're
good.
gonna we have tons of information to cover, so we're gonna just move on through here.
Flipping along. Yeah, and people are sending in their questions, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, we'll try to get
Um,
to as many as we can at the end.
yeah. So, themes and through threads. So let's talk about what this is. So the theme we've already been talking about. The theme is food in the first section. Her desire to travel is in there too, and her struggles with God are in the first sections. So she seeds what's going to come later in the early sections. She seeds also her grief about losing her husband and her lover early on, pulls it through in the middle and the end as well. There's more of the information earlier because she's more kind of distraught by it. But in all the sections, the main themes of beyond food, travel, and God, loss, feeling too alone, feeling depressed, not feeling beautiful, not feeling pretty enough. I mean, the things that we can also identify with. In the middle, she's focusing on devotion try it out. She remembers Italy very fondly and so on. She brings that through and she reflects on her husband and her lover and feels tempted to should she contact them and so on. And so it becomes a very multi-layered story, as you can see, and most books really are multi-layered. And then in the last section, it's about love, finding love in Bali, and it's also about devotion, and it's about self-exploration in yet another way. So again, it's like juggling maybe 6 balls or something, but don't get overwhelmed about it. This is part of why we talk about structure, and when we go into our own classes, our smaller class here, Eat, Pray, Love, the 4-week class coming up, and our long classes, we do a lot of instructing in both of them about how you can find what do I do with my themes, where do I put them, and how do I figure it out. And so that is something very important. As Brooke said, we respect and honor that some people are coming from more sort of what you call it, a left brain space where they easily find structure and they really like it and it works for them very easily. And other people may come from they hate outlines. I was one of these people. They don't like outlines. They had bad experiences in high school outlining and writing essays, and they don't like it. But we make it a tool that you can choose to use as a way to help you sort through these layers. Um, so let's see. So why don't you talk about the formula containing the story, because I think it goes right along with what I'm talking about now with these themes and layers.
That's perfect. Yeah, definitely. So the idea of a container, I really like this visual imagery because your memoir has to be contained, and so does your chapters, or so do your chapters, and ultimately so do your scenes, the SC scenes. And it's important to think about that container because I think a lot of where memoirists go astray, and I just see this over and over and over again, is in meandering, is not knowing when to pull back, not really understanding the parameters around their chapters or around their scenes. A lot of what we teach in our longer course really does come down to how to do scene well. And, master memoirists are masters of scene, because I would argue that, those memoirists who do not have a handle on scene do not have a handle on their memoir, because the moment that the scene starts to get out of control is the moment you lose the reader. The reader is kind of like, whoa, where are we? And so this is, it's a really valuable thing to understand it in the sense of a container, right? That if you have a contained scene, and if you're looking at the slides, you can see that I put a glass of water here, because once you start to overflow that, that's what it feels like to the reader. You know, that you have kind of gone off on a tangent, or that you're not coming back, or, you know, I have this experience all the time where someone opens a scene, you know, with a certain place and time, which is what a scene is supposed to be, and then they, you know, just kind of taper off into someplace else. And this is the whole thing about, you know, when I was talking earlier about structure, you know, and it's not to be, you know, out of control about structure, or rigid about structure, but to have some semblance of what you're doing so that you really do know how and where to rein yourself in. And so when looking at Elizabeth Gilbert's chapters, you know, she really does take you on a journey, and it's so seamless. You know, when you read good memoir, you aren't usually paying attention to the scenes and the transitions unless you're studying memoir or teaching memoir, and then you really are. But, you know, like I mentioned, so many of her little chapters were just little scenes, you know, and then she would pick up right where she left off, and it would be the next chapter. And that really functioned well, but she did have these little containers. And so because she was attempting to do 108 mini chapters, as I mentioned, her chapters do in fact function more like scenes than they do like chapters. And if you want to have a really fantastic experience of just witnessing, you know, very layered scene building, then you want to check out Wild. And we actually sell the archives of our course Wild on our website at the Write Your Memoir in 6 Months website, because I think that class that we did on scene, the 1-hour class on scene and transition for Wild, is probably one of the best classes we've ever taught. And one of the reasons is just because of, you know, paying attention to how Cheryl Strayed nests her scenes, you know, and really watching that that skill set, you know, and it's not a talent. I want to be really clear on that. It is a skill. It is something that you have to learn how to do, and once you learn to contain your own story, you begin to really see how you're leading your reader and how you're leading your memoir, and your memoir is not leading you. And that is a really clear distinction in, you know, basically going from you know, amateur to pro on the memoir writing journey. Is when you realize, like, I'm going to lead my memoir, I'm not going to let my memoir lead me. It's a big shift.
Well, I want to add that I agree, and I want to add that, you know, when we start writing memoir, a lot of times we're coming from the passion for our story, and we don't have a handle on these things, you know, and you know, we're teaching craft in this and in the Wild course, and of course in all the courses we're teaching craft, but we both know that it's a gigantic swimming through process that you all have to do, and we know that you need to do some free-form swimming for a while before you may have an answer to some of the things that we're bringing up today. Well, we will try to get as many questions as we can, but so one way that we teach how to take the chaos of your, you know, of your memoir that in progress or just beginning it, is to think about the significant moments that are part of your story, and I call them turning points. So you know, we use the turning points as a way of capturing significant moments, because every scene and chapter in a memoir needs to be there for a reason. And so, and when you're talking about going from the amateur to the professional, this is part of the journey. Is I'm going to list my turning points, and I'm going to look at what was significant, and I'm going to see if the free writing or the chapters I've been doing fit with some of the craft issues and questions that I need to be asking myself. And that's how we make that transition, is becoming more aware of the tools that we are using, or learning to use new tools. And some of you may have done a great job already in writing scenes and keeping track of themes, and that's wonderful, and we love to see that. At the same time, knowing and naming all these craft tools that we teach and that we talk about and that every writer eventually has to learn makes it easier and easier for you to get all the way through your first draft and look at your revision and have some answers to those questions.
Absolutely. And I do want to go back because you talked about the passion people. And, you know, I feel that there are really two motivators that I've seen when I talk with memoirists and the motivators to write a book. And, you know, the first is a group of people who went through an experience and they didn't have the book that they wanted to read. You know, for whatever reason, they couldn't find what they wanted. It wasn't on the market. And so they set out to write the book that they wished they had when they went through their experience. And then the second people are those people who can't not write their story. You know, and many of you are those people. You know, you can't give it up. You know, some people are plagued by their memoir. Other people are, you know, it's more of a joy, but, you know, it's something that nags at them. I mean, mostly when this is the case, you know, there can be moments of good feeling in here, but there's a certain amount of pressure and responsibility and weightiness around that because it's not going to let you go, you know, and you're not going to get to live this life in peace unless you do this thing. So for those of you, you know, we certainly understand people who are coming from both places, but that latter group of people, I mean, in some sense, both are passion people, but that latter group of people has a little bit more of a, I guess, a burden, you know, in the sense that you are going to have to write this memoir at some point, and or, you know, you're sitting with it and wishing for accountability or wishing for, you know, some way to push yourself along with it. And, you know, we definitely have been there and guided people through that place. And these things that Linda Joy is pointing to right now, these techniques, are ways to support you along the way and things that we teach in our longer course. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have to come from passion and we have to come from knowledge ultimately if you want to write a memoir that goes beyond just like a journaling kind of thing. And for some people that is what they want to write, but we know that a lot of people, if you're writing a journal, that you're never going to show it to anybody anyway, but a memoir is a story and it uses story techniques, and that's part of why we're passionate about teaching this. Is a lot of memoirs, they're new, not everyone, but it's new to them to know the naming and the focus on what the techniques are and still integrate the passion to write and have both. And then that really helps you get through all the way through your memoir. We're excited about that.
Absolutely, yes, we are. All right, so we want to move into Q&A, but before we do, we want to ask you / invite you to join us for more. And so if you're interested, intrigued by what you've heard tonight, here's the special, and this really is only for those of you who are on the webinar tonight. So we know a lot of people are going to listen in and be watching this tomorrow, and we apologize that the $75 offer will not be available to you. But you can sign up. There are two prices on the site beyond the $75, and they're $89 and $99. And so we do invite you to sign up for the lesser cost at $89. But we did want to give an exclusive tonight for $75 for the 4-week course, and we are going to be covering a lot of fantastic stuff. Linda, actually, because I have the webinar, I don't have our curriculum pulled up, but maybe you could just highlight what the 4 different weeks are going to be while I continue to talk here, so that people know what they're getting. But if you follow this link to the 1-month intros for Eat, Pray, Love, you can read about it and you can sign up for $75 and join us for the next 4 weeks. It starts on November 5th. And just interrupt me when you have the information.
I have it. I'll tell you what they are. In the first class, we're going to talk about what is a formulaic memoir and what makes it so popular with agents. And we're going to go into more detail than we could go in today about that, and move into character development. And so we're going to talk about, you know, how the countries are characters as well as the character development of the people and what character development means. And then we're going to talk about you know, tools like description and scene writing and a lot more on themes in much more detail, and the fact that this book brings in a lot of information too. And we're going to talk about what that information is and what the reader learns and how you can do that. And then we're going to talk about the transformative journey. Again, this is the hero-heroine journey, and that's what we're going to cover. It includes a whole lot of other things, flashbacks and how to make transitions and everything.
Is that all 4 classes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All
right. Yeah, so if you want more information and want to see it visually, please go online and check that out. And then this offer, too, if you're interested in the 6-month course, you get $100 if you sign up tonight, and then we're also offering $100 for people who are paying in 1 or 2 installments. So if you have questions, just email, respond to the email that you signed up for, and we will answer personally any questions that come through, especially with regard to the longer class, because it is such a commitment. And if you go to program details, it's very detailed, what you get there, including tons of good bonuses and stuff like that. So we just invite you to check that out. And then, but we also want to make sure to take your questions tonight, and that could be, questions about what we talked about, and or the course, by all means, but we wanted to leave a hefty chunk of time here at the end because we knew there would be a lot of questions, and so we have until the hour, and we're anxious to hear from some of you. So start getting your questions in there.
Can you see the questions, Brooke?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, one of them is how long are the classes, and that's an easy one. Each class, in the 4-week class, is an hour, which includes time for questions. And in the long class, the classes are an hour and 15 minutes, which also includes time for questions. And we do these on a call basis, so we actually are talking directly to each other.
Yeah, exactly. And then you also get, one-on-one time with one of us. You get assigned a mentor. We read your work. So it's much more intensive, and you can read more about that on the site. So let's see. Diana asked, do you have to have 3 components for the formulaic memoir, or can you only have 2? You definitely don't even have to have components. So let me make that clear. I mean, Liz Gilbert's is formulaic because it's the Eat, Pray, Love divided into 3 sections. But it doesn't even have to have sections. It's not having parts that makes a memoir formulaic. So what I mentioned earlier about the hero's journey, I worked with a woman. The hero's journey was 8 chapters because the hero's journey had 8 components. So you can certainly do something like that. Another example of something that's formulaic, again, when you're thinking about concept, it's like, what could be something clever? Okay, so like I worked with a woman who was writing a memoir about couch surfing. Okay, and so she literally stayed on people's couches for a year, and while she was unemployed, and so each chapter was a different couch that she stayed on, and this was still formulaic because she was doing like really clever things, using metaphors and kind of fun little pithy statements to tie together the concept of her memoir. And so that is another formulaic concept, because every chapter is a different couch. And so it's really just thinking about your structure in a way that offers the reader a very clear formula. And so it's not about having parts or about dividing your book into Eat, Pray, Love or Mind, Body, Spirit. I want to be really clear about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, some of the questions, there's so many questions, we probably won't get to all of them, but I'm noticing that some of them have to do with, how to contain, how to use flashbacks, and how to also be creative. And I just want to address that, and you can too, of course, Brooke. So again, in our long class, we use your own work as a way to answer your specific questions. And one of the questions had to do with sometimes finding structure gets in the way of writing, and we know that this happens. But what we also notice is that in the process of several months, I mean, no matter how, unless your memoir has really gone through a revision, you're going to spend several months writing your memoir anyway, that over the course of integrating how to think about structure and how to invite the muse to help you write your scenes, you'll find, I think, that these things aren't as different as they may seem, and maybe the way you experience them right now, that there's much more flow between the idea of thinking of structure and thinking creatively. And we teach you how to do that with your own memoir in the long class.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stuff that we're teaching, I mean, we love to teach these the bestsellers because they do point to things that are working. But Paulette asked this question, does this high concept work best with compressed timeline, like a span of 1 year? Is this a good way to package the various aspects of one's life for a memoir? And I do want to point back to what I mentioned earlier about Wild being a framed memoir, and that being a timeline that started at point A, which is more or less the beginning of the Pacific Crest Trail, and ends at the end of that journey. And the fact that she covers so much more than just those months on the trail, that she uses flashback and memory to go back to her childhood, to go back to when her mother was alive, to tell us all kinds of backstory. And so I think it's one way to do it, or you can do this idea of a year, for instance, and obviously Eat, Pray, Love, in addition to being a formulaic memoir, is also a travel memoir. And travel typically does not last more than a year, because then you start to live someplace, and so if you're doing travel memoir, that makes sense to keep it contained in that way. Or if you have, like I mentioned, the Julie and Julia, it was an idea to cook, for a year, to do every recipe in Julia Child's book. And so those kinds of things are like the experimental memoirs. But by no means do you have to do it in this compressed timeline, but you do want to ask yourself, what is the timeline? I personally think that a good timeline is anywhere from 1 year to 10 years. Like coming of age memoirs are often 10 years, but I think, if you start from age 5 and end your book at age 55, it's a pretty long journey. And it just can help your reader, and it can help the succinctness of your story to condense that initial timeline, point A to point B, a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, someone is asking a question about, family, telling the truth, legal and ethical questions. I mean, several people have asked that, actually. And these are very complex questions, but I just want to address the concern about it. And that is that everybody writing a memoir, not everybody, but most people writing a memoir have concerns of one sort or another about this. And we very much respect that and understand that. I've been teaching memoir for 15 years, and a lot of people come in and they really have a story to tell, but they worry about what we call the outer critics, meaning real life people who they can see them getting mad, or maybe they already have told them not to write a memoir, something like that. Really interferes with the writing. So we encourage all of you to, contain your story and protect it as you're working on it. And in some cases, it means just don't tell people about it for a while and work on your story yourself. Because if you get too many competing voices in your head, it makes it really hard to focus on your themes and what you have to say and why you are writing this memoir. I mean, you have a reason, and you need to respect that and try to contain it, and it will help you move forward.
Absolutely, it was perfect. And Julie asks us to discuss good uses and principles of flashback memory and backstory and how to integrate them effectively. I mean, that's something for the 6-month class. I mean, it's such a big question. And in fact, we do teach about flashback and memory, and, we specifically taught about flashback and memory in the Wild course. And so again, if that's something that's interesting to you, you can go buy the archive. I think it's $25 on our site. And there was a whole session on flashback and memory and how to integrate. But it's really important to understand, because there is a skill set there, and you want to be looking for opportunities to use flashback and memory to make your story more robust, to give it more dimensions. And, a lot of people who think, well, my memoir is the story of my life, which is really autobiography and not memoir, where it starts from, age 5 and goes to age 60, like I was saying. Those chronological memoirs, it's because memoirists are trying to think, well, I want to incorporate all of these things, and this is the story of my life, and I have to do all this stuff. And what we are arguing for is this, shorter timeline, the idea of the slice of life memoir, even if it's not formulaic, if you don't have something easy like cooking or travel or whatever, to condense that time frame and then to make use of the flashback and memory, I would argue, to some extent that's almost critical, because to read a story from start to finish, like, and then this happened in my life, 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 it's very trying on the reader, and so that is the thing about sort of condensing the timeline and making use of these skill sets. Again, I emphasize skill, because they are learned. You really do need to learn how to do this well. And, it's one of the things that certainly you can learn by taking a course. But I think that studying other people who are doing it well is another super fantastic way to do that. And Liz Gilbert certainly has memories. Peppered throughout this, everything about her divorce is told through memory scenes. And it's a really fantastic way to learn about how to integrate and weave memory, because her storyline, point A to point B, Italy to the end of the Bali trip, is told in the first person. And so anytime she moves into the past tense, she's moving into memory. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a cool little cheat sheet for you on this particular memoir to pay attention to if you go back and read it and want to take a look at that.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so many questions here. Some questions are about the website, and so the website that you're asking about is the writeyourbookin6months.com. You type that in, and then there's program details for the long course, and then there's the 1 month intros. There's little tabs on the menu. You just pull those down, and you get more information about both sets of courses there on that website.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I know probably everybody, I don't think everyone can see the slides, so we got to remember to say that out loud sometimes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this Meg saying, Gilbert's last book, Committed, has a more meandering narrative, constantly interrupted to explain, digress, teach. Do you find this as successful? Well, clearly Committed did not do as well as Eat, Pray, Love, so there's that. I think that it's a different kind of style. One thing that's interesting is that this tendency to, take a moment to explain, digress, and teach, that is part of her style. She does that in Eat, Pray, Love, absolutely, but I think she does it more succinctly. So in terms of, what is successful about Eat, Pray, Love, I think that she hit a cultural chord with this book, no question. And like I said, it's very satisfying. This idea of compartmentalizing things is satisfying to readers, and people, the human beings, like to categorize and be able to wrap their minds around things. And so it's this argument for the high concept. I have to say, as a former acquiring editor, I was always looking for high concept. I was always looking for the thing that I could just explain so easily to the marketing team. Like, oh, look at this brilliant idea. It almost didn't matter how well written it was, and so it's not necessarily a charge for all of you to go and figure out how to make a high concept book and to totally change your memoir around. But if you have something like this, it certainly could be more saleable, but most people have the more committed style book. And so the question then becomes, can you tighten up your structure to make it a little bit more formulaic? Because there are ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions have to do with changing names in the memoir and using a pen name. We get this question a lot. The deal is that pretty much all memoirs have a disclaimer about this. These are my memories. This is my truth. It's just de rigueur nowadays in publishing, and again, most people do change names unless they get permission from the actual person to use their real name in the story, which I did in my memoir, but I sent the part that I wrote about some of my friends, which was all very positive, but still they are real people living on the earth here, and So they gave me permission to use their real names. And my children, some yes, some no, in terms of real names. So it's a very important question to sort out, especially so it doesn't stop you. And then using a pen name, I mean, it depends. I know you have some good things to say about that, Brooke, but you know, if you're going to have your picture on the cover and the story is about your family, I mean, it depends on, most memoirists really can't use a pen name in my knowledge. Have you seen much of that, Brooke, in publishing?
I really haven't seen it work very well for memoir. You know, it does work okay for novels, but memoirs are tough because you're really, part of the thing is that your publisher is going to want to promote you, and then you have to show your face and, you know, be all over the place. So if you're fine with that, like there's an author that I worked with named Jenny Block, and she wrote a memoir about an open marriage, and she changed her last name to protect her family, but then she toured as Jenny Block. You know, she showed her face, and, you know, she's very out online and elsewhere, but it's not her real name, so that people can't find who her family is. But you have to, but, you know, if you did enough digging, obviously you could find out. So you have to kind of figure out what your own boundaries are on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody asked a technical question about, a detailed question about what's the down payment for the larger course. Would you like to explain that again, Brooke?
Sure, yeah, and there was a couple questions about the short course as well, so let me take a
Okay.
couple of those. The deposit on the long course is $500, and so we take $100 off on the tail end, so you do need to, you know, go ahead and do the $500 deposit, and then we'll work out a payment schedule for you over 6 months if you want. And then some of you are asking about the 4-week course. We do record every session, so if you have to miss a session, you can always watch it after the fact. But in terms of are we offering it later, we're not going to. So, you know, we understand that November is full, but it's part of the reason that we wanted to teach a course like this, which is more about studying the technique of someone else rather than our revision course, for instance, which entails a lot of work of your own work. You know, so we're hoping that this could be, you know, one of these kinds of classes that is a little bit more just indulgent, and maybe you read Eat, Pray, Love again, which both of us got to do in the last month, and that was fun. So hopefully that's clear. And if you guys have specific questions, email me. You know, don't hesitate. I'll respond to you today or tomorrow. And then I'd like to take this question just because to address it. Nancy asks, you know, is there some danger in writing your memoir as a copycat of Eat, Pray, Love formula? And that's a good question. I think yes, if it's too similar to Eat, Pray, Love, it's a problem. But if it's, you know, you're not going to do a book that is like 108 chapters based on the prayer beads, you know, divided into 3 sections. You wouldn't want to do that, you know, even if the topic was totally different. But dividing your book into 3 parts, if that made sense for your memoir, could be okay. You know, I definitely think you want to come up with your own ideas and what works for your book on the one hand, but I'm a huge fan of stealing structure. And I really want to be clear about that. You know, a lot of times when I start to work with people and they don't really know what they're doing, I'm like, what books are you like? Are you writing, or what books are similar to yours? You know, and that's not just about competitive titles, you know, what books are in your genre that are like yours, but more around structure. Because people who are lost on structure should absolutely look at what's been done before and feel like they can write something similar. And I'll say another book actually that Seal did recently was a book about, you know, like a senior year of high school. That's actually a book called The Goodbye Year by Tony Piccinini, and I mention it because it's also very formulaic, and it is 12 months, you know, and so every chapter is a month. And that is totally formula, you know, and those kinds of things are done. You know, you see them all over the place, and you just do it. You know, you if that makes sense for your book because you're over the course of the year and you want 12 chapters, perfect, you know, and it's not really the same as stealing someone's idea, you know, because structure is not really an idea. It's more just how can it, you know, how can it, what's the word I'm looking for? Like make your memoir a little bit. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
How can it be
organized?
how can it be well organized?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we are nearing the end here. We're right at 5 o'clock Pacific, so we're going to end for today. We hope that many of you will join us in the 4-week course. Someone's asking, can I enroll in the 4-week course and then sign up for the 6-month course? Of course. Yes. And so we would love to have you in Eat, Pray, Love. We'd love to have you in the long course. We're, you know, we always have a lot of fun on these webinars, and you know, there's so much to learn from bestsellers, and you know, really just to inform your process more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very exciting to also watch the students in our courses blossom. That's the only word for it. You know, we see them absorbing like sponges some of these ideas and struggling with some of them, and not, you know, like, oh, my structure, oh my gosh, well, I don't want to outline, or I do need to outline, or whatever it is. We always have something as writers that challenges us a lot. And at the same time, in anything, I come from a background of music, I come from a background of art, and when you create anything, it's a process of challenge and being challenged by the thing that you're trying to work with as your medium. And so, you know, but that's also exciting, and it's an opportunity for growth and development, and for us too. We grow and develop with every class that we teach, and we love it. So we welcome you for your questions, and thank you so much for being with us today. You're a great audience.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a fantastic night, and we'll see you soon. Good night,
Bye-bye,
Linda
everybody.
Joy. Bye.
Good night. Bye.